Hello, and welcome to the next Briefing 5P session, meeting your clients' expectations around corporate social responsibility and diversity and inclusion in partnership with She Breaks the Law, a global community of women change makers who are passionate about the power of innovation and collaboration in the legal sector. You can find their group on LinkedIn. For today's session, we'll be hearing from Kim Frampton, Luxembourg's Senior Privacy Officer and Counsel at Vodafone, and Emma Cooke, Head of Citizenship at Herbert Smith Freehills. Before I hand it over to Kim, our first speaker today, a bit of housekeeping. We are recording this session should you wish to watch back or share around with your colleagues. And we will also have time for a Q&A. So please feel free to engage just as you would on the day if we were doing this in person. I'll be monitoring the chat and Q&A sections. Be sure to say your name and firm if you could while you ask the questions, and we'll get to that during the Q&A. Now I'd like to welcome up Kim Frampton from Vodafone, who will give us a bit of a rundown on the trends she's seeing on D&I and what else she's seeing in the space. Hi, Kim.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
So thank you for inviting me today, and it's really nice to meet you all, if over Zoom. I've worked for Vodafone Group Legal Team for about 6 years now, and I'm based in our Luxembourg office, just for some context. So I've been asked to talk to you about the fact that diversity and inclusion are a core requirement now for your clients, and how the Vodafone in-house legal team is working to establish its diversity expectations, and how it's communicating those to law firms, and how we're collaborating with our panel firms to measure progress, to address our concerns, and then also to concentrate on some of the practical steps that we are taking. But before talking about how our in-house legal team is working with external firms, it seems sensible to set the context in which we, as in-house lawyers, work. So I wanted to explain what Vodafone is doing generally, as well as what our legal team is doing, then what the Vodafone supply chain is doing, and how we as a legal team are replicating that with our suppliers, our panel law firms. So Vodafone's purpose is to connect for a better future, which is about using our global connectivity to change the future positively. And we're trying to do this by creating an inclusive digital society, promoting a sustainable future which embraces everyone and protects the planet. And the goals are to invest in our networks to connect people and devices, to become a #1 employer for women, and to reduce our carbon emissions by 50% and ultimately to net. So these key points around our digital society, our inclusion for all, and the planet drive the decisions that we take. And this includes the decisions that our in-house legal team, who are all embedded in the business, take as well. So as a function within Vodafone, we have an inclusion for all team, which I lead. We have a planet and digital society team too, but I'm going to talk to you about inclusion for all and the work that we're doing. So as a team, we're working internally on some practical projects. We're looking at virtual programs for access to law, which focus on increasing the diversity of intake into the legal and compliance professions to increase the talent pool and ultimately increase the diversity of thought and problem solving within Vodafone. We'd normally run vacation schemes and go and speak in schools, but like all of you, we're finding that running those programs in a virtual space creates a lot more planning to keep people engaged. And at the moment, we're focusing on projects that involve schools near our offices. And we're looking at schools that aren't the focus of other amazing projects like the Sutton Trust. Another thing that we're doing as a team is we're driving a move internally from being not racist to being anti-racist, which for us is about moving from a stance of disagreeing with racism, which can sometimes be a passive position, to being in a position to call out racist acts. We've recognized that not everyone in our team and our business feels comfortable having conversations about racism and racist acts. So we're taking a few practical steps to help empower everyone. We've started off by initiating wider group conversations, sharing some views from people who've experienced racism and talking about the impact of that racism on the life choices they've made. We've provided resources for our team We've provided things like webinars, articles, films, even Instagram hashtags, so that people can go and look at things outside of work time and educate themselves. We've drafted a written framework for smaller team conversations so that people have a structure that they can move within. And then we've circled back to larger group meetings to collate thoughts and action points, which we've then taken to our group diversity and inclusion teams and to our Black professional networks, so that we can use those to help support their strategies and produce policies that enable an anti-racist stance across things like product development, as well as working environments. And we're also running webinars, which can be hosted by the legal and external affairs team, but are then available to everyone in Vodafone. Another piece of work that we've been doing is promoting safe spaces and also promoting the fact that we believe that Vodafone is a safe space for our LGBTQ plus colleagues and communities. And we've seen that because we're all working virtually, the simple messages that you get in the office, people wearing their ally lanyards, or people having conversations about their same-sex partners, it's not something we're getting now. We just don't have that office interaction. So one idea that we've had and that we're working on is to produce a one-stop shop for new starters, giving them a list of steps they can take to join support networks or ally networks, how they can demonstrate allyship with their signature sign-offs, and creating videos of people's experiences working within Vodafone, amongst other things. We're also working to ensure that our female lawyers are linked into the global Vodafone women's networks, because when you're trying to make a change or you're trying to drive progress, numbers work. So we want to help build women-focused views into both our working environments and our product development. So that's some of the internal context in which we approach the work that we do across the legal community. But we're also conscious that we don't exist in a bubble, that the legal community is made up of talent based in law firms as well. And on a selfish level, we know that a lot of the talent that comes to Vodafone will have worked in law firms. And we know that if we get more talent in our teams, more diverse experiences, then we benefit from a more diverse thought perspective for problem solving, which is ultimately the goal. So if the wider legal community has a wider diverse base for talent attraction, we all win. And also, we know it's the right thing to do. So when we look at the Vodafone context, it's important for us to work with law firms, who are our suppliers, in a way that mirrors the Vodafone supply chain strategy. So I wanted to also include a helicopter view of that supply chain strategy, and then talk about how Vodafone Legal works with its suppliers within that same strategy. So our SCM strategy concentrates on planet or sustainability and inclusion, because that's where we know we can have the most impact. In fact, we can have a massive impact with our suppliers due to the volume of spend that we have. It's quite a lot of influence. And whenever I talk to law firms, someone always reminds me that because we're the customer and we have the wallets, we can use that financial clout to promote change. And I think that influence is very clear when we look at the supply chain goals around sustainability and inclusion. So SCM is using a purpose-led RFQ process to drive change, and then the legal team has used that same process around process-led tender RFQs to work with our firms. So what we're doing is our supply chain looking to increase diversity and inclusion and represent the society we operate in by implementing processes to influence diverse procurement decisions, by creating opportunities for diversity-led, brilliant companies, by embedding women-led businesses into our supply chain, and giving a greater weighting to suppliers who commit to increasing women in positions of authority and working collaboratively through mentoring schemes to drive positive change. And now I also think you can't talk about diversity and inclusion without talking about the planet and sustainability. Whilst Vodafone might not be an example that comes to mind as quickly as, say, fast fashion, when it comes to sustainability and the impact on the world's diverse populations, we know that 87% of our carbon footprint comes from our scope 3 or indirect footprint. So that basically means that our carbon footprint is predominantly made up of the work that suppliers are doing to produce goods and services for Vodafone. So our supply chain strategy then focuses on a supplier-based carbon reduction target and using renewable energies and recycling with it. So both of these targets are sort of done by working with our suppliers. We know that many of our suppliers, both in our general supply chain and more specifically in our legal community, are ahead of us in their diversity journey or their sustainability journey. For instance, some of our panel firms have great programs for the development of women that we know we can learn from. And some have projects linking the UN sustainability goals in a similar way to how Vodafone is linking the sustainability goals and concentrating on that really important link between diversity and sustainability. So then, once we've set out that sort of context, we then sort of move to the diversity and inclusion work that our in-house legal team is doing with law firms in our shared community. And I guess our external work is focused in two strands. So one initiative that a lot of us are working on is the General Counsel for Diversity and Inclusion Initiative. And this was set up last year by 5 General Counsel: Rosemary Martin from Vodafone, Donnie Ching from Shell, Richard Price of Anglo American, Caroline Cox from BHP, and Ritva Sotomar of Unilever. And the concept behind the initiative is to promote and increase diversity and inclusion across the legal industry. So currently the initiative has over 100 signatories from companies, and the working group in the initiative is looking to provide tangible ideas for promoting diversity in the communities. So we're producing some guidance, we're producing some reporting structures that you can use, and KPIs as well that companies can use, hopefully assisting in producing a one-stop shop for all reporting so that firms see less of the variety of requests that are currently happening. And the initiative is trying to collaborate with law firms to get input to make sure that what we're setting out is reasonable and sensible, as well as encouraging progress. And then the other work that the Vodafone Group legal team is doing is concentrating on collaborating directly with our panel firms. So this is multifaceted, I guess, involving some collaboration that mirrors our own internal focus and the projects I talked about earlier. We've reached out to our panel firms to work with them to create links between their women's networks and our women's networks, their LGBTQ networks, and their networks for Black and minority ethnic lawyers and professionals, along with our own networks. So one of the other things we're also looking at is joint projects, for instance, access to law programs with firms based in our office footprints, or scaling our ideas around packs for new starters, setting out support networks, and how that could benefit firms as well. And then another big project in our work is around measuring progress with our panel firms. So we started this work last year, sort of setting out what we in Vodafone would like to achieve. And then we held a day in January where we invited representatives from all of our panel firms to meet with representatives from Vodafone. We took them through our purpose and we set the scene with some of the work that Vodafone is doing generally, like changing the face of technology which is a project where we're working to increase the diversity of people working in technology, which will hopefully lead to things like a reduced bias in AI. And then we talked about the work that we as a legal community could do, including activities that we could all commit to. So this then resulted in a list of requirements from Vodafone to its panel firm, which we split into 3 parts. So the first part was we asked for some reporting of the demography of firms as they are now. And we also asked them to work with the General Counsel for Diversity and Inclusion to help improve the methodology that that group is putting forward. We asked for details of who specifically works on matters for Vodafone, to the extent where we've asked that 40% of billed time is produced by women and 50% of billed matter time is produced by fee earners with a different diversity characteristic. And then we also said that we'd like to work in a way that recognises different working patterns and needs. And we know that a lot of our panel firms also want to do that. And I think some of it is quite similar to the way that the Mindful Business Charter sets out working patterns and how important that can be. But it was important to us that when we get together to work, we're honest about everyone's work-life balance, and that we recognise how integral that is to being inclusive. So if we've got one person on a team who doesn't work on Wednesdays, it's pretty basic and easy for us all to ensure that they're always included by never having team meetings on a Wednesday. But it's something that it's really important to set out at the beginning of a matter so that it doesn't become an issue further down the line. So we then stress tested the requirements with some of our panel firms, and we found out where we could go further to create stretch targets, and where what we were asking for was either quite ridiculous or wouldn't lead to what we wanted. So we had some really good challenges back from our firms, promoting us to examine whether we could meet the goals we were setting. And in some cases, the firm suggested that we could go a lot further, so really made us up our game. And we've now rolled this out to our panel firms and to firms hoping to join our panel. And to make this quite clear that this is a requirement, we've embedded the need to work with Vodafone to meet these requirements into our contracts. But it's really important for us to recognise this is us working with our panel firms. We haven't moved to a place of capping fees, but we want to be in a place where we're helping to create plans with any firms that aren't meeting the goals. And so I guess those are the things that we're doing. And just as a quick recap, the practical steps that we're taking is we're trying to work with our non-legal colleagues across Vodafone. We're providing goals for ourselves and for our firms. We're working on toolkits and guidance to support internally and externally. And we're working in our local communities to increase the talent base that we all pull from. And so just wanted to set some of those out for you.
No, some really good stuff there, Kim. Thanks so much for that overview. We'll say goodbye to you for now, and we'll bring you back during the Q&A. And I'd like to welcome Emma Cooke from Herbert Smith Freehills. Hi, Emma, and she'll give us a breakdown of what they're doing at the firm.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. And thanks very much, Kim, for the great overview of Vodafone. It's really interesting. And I'll draw on some of what Kim has said when I talk about Herbert Smith Freehills and what we do. But first of all, I'll introduce myself again. So I'm Emma Cooke. I'm the head of citizenship, and I work globally across all aspects of CSR across Herbert Smith Freehills, across our offices around the world. I've been at the firm for just over 9 years now, and when I was asked to join this session today, I was thinking about the kind of trend that I've seen from our clients. But it's important to say it's not just from our clients, it's from a range of stakeholders. But the expectations from our stakeholders are changing in this area, in CSR, D&I, responsible business, whatever you kind of want to call it. There is definitely a change in those expectations. So although we're talking about clients today, it's absolutely across the board. And I guess what I was seeing very early on from clients when I joined kind of 9 years ago was very different to what we're seeing now. And it's important to see the kind of journey that we've come on, and then also touch on what I think might be happening in the future. So when I do cast my mind back to 9 years ago, it was very much kind of, oh, can you send me a policy, and never hearing anything back really, or maybe getting the odd question or two. And now it's dramatically changed. There are partnerships, there's a lot more information required. As Kim was saying, you know, Vodafone are embedding this into their contracts, and putting requirements and expectations for their law firms on their CSR and diversity programs within those contracts. I'm seeing it become a mandatory part of some of our client work, especially in Australia with Australian governments. They're mandating a certain level of pro bono hours or Indigenous community engagement. And I also recently saw a UK social housing client provider put it within their pitch response and saying, what will you do for us? We want you to do, what they've done is kind of break it down and say, we want you to do 100 points of value, and 1 point equals X, Y, and Z. And then we had to kind of put together a recipe of okay, this is what we would do for 100 points. We would do some pro bono, we'd do some skills-based sharing, we would do a donation to the foundation, we would do all these kind of pieces to build that recipe together for that client. So yeah, so dramatically different from, oh, can you just give me a policy, and then me not hearing anything, to all of this engagement and all of this conversation. So I guess for me, I've tried to distill it down to 5 different ways that we work with clients, just to kind of make it a bit more palatable, I suppose. And we work with clients across these 5 different ways. So I'm just going to kind of tell you what they are, a brief mention on each of those, and then give some kind of examples. So the first one's pitch responses. And as I say, they are dramatically changing. So it's not just about policies, it's about huge kind of responses on a whole range of data, and they can be very kind of sophisticated and be using the large software systems like an EcoVadis kind of software system where you sign up and disclose your data and then it gets published to various clients. Or it can be a very huge kind of Excel spreadsheet, which has a whole number of different tabs on a whole variety of different things. Or it can be kind of very particular questions. I'm getting a lot of questions at the moment on our modern slavery reporting in Australia, because that's a new reporting requirement within Australia. So they're asking very particular questions on that because it's new and it's kind of a hot topic. Yeah, so it's pitch responses. The other is advice. So as Kim was saying earlier, there are areas in which law firms are maybe a bit more ahead of the curve than some of our clients. So we have in the past been asked to work with our clients, to advise them on different areas, to tell them how we might have done something, and to give our kind of experience and expertise in that area. And that's a really great way to kind of forge these relationships. The number 3 is kind of one-off projects and events. So we've done a whole series of different one-off projects and events with clients, ranging on a whole heap of different issues. And then some of those have turned into kind of longer term partnerships, which is my kind of 4th way in which we work with clients, is really entering into a partnership that may last for a number of years. And there are a number of different partnerships that I can think of at Herbert Smith Freehills, where we've joined forces with our partners to try and do something together. And then the last is what I'm seeing more of at the moment is these more regular meetings. So whether that's a kind of annual review meetings, particularly focused on CSR and D&I, where the relationship team is sitting down, or whether that's more just general meetings within the kind of client meeting space, where the partner wants information because the client has asked for information on X, Y, Z to do with kind of CSR. So I think they're the kind of 5 different areas where I see where the interaction is happening between law firm and client. In terms of kind of 2 examples I can think of off the top of my head, the one is around social mobility. So social mobility is a huge kind of issue within the legal sector, and that access to the profession. And it was back in 2012 when David Morley, who was at A&O at the time, spearheaded this initiative called Prime, which is about kind of fair access to the legal profession. And at that time, it was very much focused on law firms and what was possible. And we were one of the founding firms that came together with 22 other law firms to look at that fair access to the profession, and widening access. So what started with one of our clients as a kind of one-off for us to say, right, we have this prime commitment, we're going to be offering quality work experience to those that are underrepresented in the legal sector, but are capable and really want a career in law. So what started as a kind of, we want to widen their commercial awareness, because that's a really important part of being a lawyer and also going through that interview process. So what we'd like to do with you, banking client that we're working with, is partner with you on a kind of one-off project to bring this group of students down to the bank, and for you, the in-house legal team, to kind of explain how an in-house legal team works versus a kind of law firm. A lot of young people have no idea that there are lawyers working in client. They think all the lawyers are just in the law firm, and actually half of them don't realise that there are other people and other professions working in the law firm environment as well. They just think it's kind of an entire group of lawyers, which obviously, you know, there's a whole range of business services that sit behind that, and supporting the partnership to work. So what started as a kind of one-off project where we were taking a group of students down and they were educating them about, okay, well, this is what an in-house legal team does, this is how we might work, this is the type of work we do ourselves, and this is the type of work that we would give to a large law firm like yours. So it started as that, and then it developed into more advice. So that banking client then said, this is really cool what you're doing, we really like this, it's important to us as well. We have entry positions that come in, so we don't just rely on recruiting lawyers that may decide to work in-house. They also had a kind of trainee contract position as well. So they wanted that advice to try and develop their own. So we had them in, they sat and they shadowed, and they took part in the entire week-long work experience program, almost as I guess they took part not as a student, but as a kind of honorary member, and they took part and they took notes, and they took all of our kind of learning and how we structured everything into a really quality experience, and then took that back into their office, and with our help then they set up their own week work experience, which is one of the first in-house legal teams that were then committing to Prime at the time. So, and then we started then working with them. So then we would go in to that law firm and into that in-house team and say, well, this is how the law firm works. So we're kind of swapping sides. So now it's a full-fledged partnership, and we've been working with them for years and years, always swapping knowledge and advice and expertise, and swapping students going to each other's programs. But it's been a really great way to forge that relationship, but also have more impact and work with more students, raise more students' commercial awareness and understanding. That's kind of one example. And then the other that I was thinking of in preparation for today was a reflection on a recent panel pitch. So we had a recent panel pitch from a retailer, and we recognised early on that, you know, looking at their website and researching about the retailer, that purpose, responsible business was a really core part of their value, and kind of recognising that early on to make sure that what we were going to go back in terms of our panel pitching was going to be aligned with their values. So we involved the team really early on in trying to put together the materials that go into the pitch to say, this is also important to us. All of what you're doing externally, it's important to us too, and these are the different synergies, and these are the ways that we might be able to work together on these particular social issues that are important to you. So that went down really well. And then what we did was actually have myself, it could have been anyone from the team, but myself attending that panel pitch, just to kind of really demonstrate how important we saw that, and also allow the client to ask us any questions, and to start that dialogue on our kind of shared values and shared beliefs. And within that session, we also recognised what they were trying to achieve within their own business, how we could actually help them achieve that. So demonstrating how we as a law firm can actually help them achieve their CSR, ESG, responsible business areas, whether that's kind of advising on like decarbonisation or modern slavery type requirements, all the types of things where I might, as an in-house, obviously I have lots of lawyers that I can speak to all the time, but how us as a law firm might be able to help the client kind of advance their responsible business journey. So they're kind of two examples that I could think of where we've started kind of working, the two examples or key examples where we've been working with clients. For me, I guess the benefits of working with clients and leaning into this expectation that the clients have, that I think there's probably three things for me. One is like, you really get to know your client on such a different level. I've been in numerous events where we've been working with the client on like a social mobility project or a community project, and we've also got our lawyers, our lawyers from our team together and gone out together, and then we've been having conversations about social mobility and background, and the in-house team are talking about themselves in a very different way that they wouldn't have normally talked perhaps to our lawyers in the past. And so you get to find out all this stuff about them, and you just really get to know them on a different level, and feel, I don't know, closer and a bit more authentic, because you necessarily haven't had those discussions before because you've been talking about X, Y, and Z matter, and you haven't kind of paused and thought about background and challenge and those sorts of things. As I said before, the living your values, partnerships and working on client expectations really helps you live your values together. And I think values and purpose, as I said earlier, it's a trend that I'm seeing across all stakeholder groups. So, and I'm sure many of you are the same in kind of how you shop and how you behave. You're asking a lot more, and you're demonstrating your values and how you shop and how you behave with others. So I think partnerships is a great way to kind of live those values with clients. And then, as I alluded to earlier, partnerships means you can have greater impact. And who doesn't want to have greater impact? Who doesn't want to help more people and to raise more money and to make people more commercially aware and get people into the legal sector that might not have been in otherwise? So a huge number of benefits. But there are also challenges. So I don't think it's fair for me just to talk about the kind of all of the benefits that working with clients and all the expectations clients have in this space doesn't come with challenges, because that's not a fair representation. There are challenges. As I say, expectations are growing. The team sizes on our side have been growing, but perhaps not at the rate that client expectations have been going. The layers of reporting that we now have, as I said earlier, some are very sophisticated with software tools, others it's large Excel spreadsheets, others it's meetings and conversations. So just the kind of the management of the reporting becomes sometimes and often quite kind of burdensome. And you get kind of inundated with requests that are in very different formats. It's quite a live issue for me at the moment, because, as I said, we're getting a lot of requests about modern slavery from our Australian clients, because it's that new reporting requirement. So we're just being kind of inundated, but all the questionnaires are in different formats, we're all asking different questions. Some of them are slightly different. So it is a challenge to actually have the resource to sit down and answer those questions. Sometimes the deadlines are really short. I don't know whether that's driven by the client or driven by our internal teams that perhaps haven't passed the questionnaire on quickly enough. But yeah, that's absolutely a kind of a challenge. And the other challenge sometimes that we've come across is partnerships are wonderful when they work and when there's a true alignment of values and when it's a real 50-50 partnership. And there are times when partnerships don't work out, or they become more challenging, or they're more weighted towards potentially us as in the law firm doing a little bit more. And that sometimes is a challenge, because you are adding value to that relationship, within the client space, but you're also taking along a lot of the burden in trying to kind of develop that partnership and bring it along. So yeah, so they're probably the two challenges that are most prevalent, I think, for me and the work that I've been doing and what I've been seeing. So lastly, I thought I'd just focus on the future a little bit and just think about what I think we might see in the future. And probably not that that far away, to be honest. I think we'll see greater calls for transparency. So I think we're seeing a lot of calls for transparency at the moment in terms of who's working on which matters. I think Kim said earlier that they expect 40% of the billable time to be from women, but all the reporting that sits behind that and all of the data that sits behind that is increasingly important. I'm definitely seeing that on the environmental side as well. Kim also mentioned about being a net zero business, and being part of that supply base means that you need to reach into your suppliers. Obviously, as law firms, we're going to be high up there in terms of spend with some of our suppliers. So we will be some key suppliers for some of our clients. Therefore, they will start engaging with us and want really detailed, granular data on carbon, and will be expecting us to reduce our carbon as well, and have very sophisticated carbon and climate change strategies. As I spoke about earlier, lots of stuff has moved into a kind of hygiene factor now. Like the stuff that I thought was impressive 9 years ago, like having our environment policy and having, you know, oh, we've got a policy, yes. Like that's just hygiene now. Like it's there, and I don't think anyone's impressed by it. So making sure that thinking about what might become hygiene in the future. And maybe it is about this kind of reporting on billable or the reporting on carbon, but just thinking about, okay, how can we keep on top of that? How can we make that available to all of our clients, not just the key strategic ones or the ones that are asking for it? And what does it mean when it does become hygiene, because something else will take over, and then you have something else that you have to report on? I think I can see a trend in kind of the way we work becoming a kind of call or an expectation from clients. So we've been doing some interesting work, as I'm sure some of you have. I know you're representing other law firms, but joining the Greener Arbitration Project. That's all about how we can run arbitrations in a greener, more environmentally friendly way. So I'm sure that will be a kind of future trend that we see, that how we can actually deliver our services in a more environmentally friendly way. As I said earlier, we're probably going to be asked to be reducing our carbon footprint by other clients. So it's important that we can demonstrate that the work that we do can also be done in an environmentally friendly way. And then more how we can support our clients. So I mentioned it earlier about the panel pitch. Thinking about, these are important issues to our clients now. There's a growing movement around corporate responsibility, responsible business. We're really well positioned as law firms to support clients on that journey. So trying to understand what they're trying to achieve, and maybe cross-selling between departments and thinking about, okay, well, if they're asking about this, think about modern slavery, read their CSR reports. What are they trying to achieve? How does the law fit into that? So I can see there being a real area there in the future for law firms to support. So I'll leave it there. I think that we've got some questions coming in. So thank you ever so much.
No, that was a really good overview. Thanks, Emma. Yeah, we'll bring back Kim now. Kim, if you want to join us, then we'll get to the Q&A. I think we have a Q&A already for you, Kim, during your session. They asked, winning and losing work deals or instructions on the basis of diversity. Do you have any examples of where this was a reason for winning and losing? And do you have advice for law firms to better respond to clients' D&I needs? So
in our general supply chain, I know that the way that our weighting has changed on our RFQ now means that actually, there's a real significant chance that companies will win work with Vodafone when they can demonstrate that they're committed to diversity and inclusion, particularly around women. That's one of the things that the supply chain is looking at. I was talking to a colleague yesterday, and it's really making a difference. So yes, we're seeing it generally. When it comes to our panel firms, I know that the way that we're talking about our panel firms, diversity and inclusion is always a consideration. How we can work with firms and how we can promote our programs around diversity and inclusion is always a factor. The things that have mattered to us recently have been, you know, will you work with us and collaborate with us in programs that we want to run? It's about the conversations that you're willing to have at the moment. A firm that hasn't done quite so well is one that didn't respond to any of the questions that we were raising recently. In fact, actually just sort of, I wouldn't go so far as to say ignored, but didn't respond in a way that allowed us to have a meaningful conversation. You know, we're also in a position where we're not, like I said in my, you know, like I said earlier, we're not in a place where we're capping fees or we're walking out of the door with firms that aren't on quite the same journey that we're on. But we do want to have that collaborative conversation. So if you're not coming to us and saying, hey, we want to get involved, these are the things that we can offer, and these are the things that you can offer, we're not moving forward. And then that doesn't work for us.
Yeah, how about you?
I'm not sure that's entirely answered the question, but
that's right. How are you seeing that in terms of the law firm perspective, winning and losing work around DI?
I think much the same as Kim. I haven't seen it be the feedback on you've lost this work because you haven't had this, but much the way in which we work with our own suppliers, it would be, okay, if you're not doing this, we want to work with you to make sure that it's collaborative and you get to the same position as we want you to be in. Yeah, so I think it's very much about setting the expectations and then moving the needle forwards rather than a kind of blanket, you're not doing it, so no, we're not going to be working with you. So no, I haven't seen it outrightly in the kind of, we haven't lost work as a result, and we haven't kind of taken a supplier off our supplier list as a result of that. But what we do aim to do is work with that supplier or that client to address the particular issues or concerns.
How are you both seeing changes in engagements, both internally, Emma, internally with your lawyers, but also externally with clients, and likewise for Kim, with your panel firms, but also internally changed during the pandemic? Have people been, I guess, more engaging? Has it been harder to engage with people in that area because they're more focused on work now, working remotely? What's that diversity and inclusion look like now that we're in the middle of pandemic? Emma, why don't you start?
I think for us, actually, it's been a bit easier. Clients have been much more open for collaboration, for kind of, and it's easier to get things in the diary because people are all working from home and diaries aren't as busy. Maybe not that they aren't as busy, it's just perhaps people are more available and they're not kind of traveling around, and you don't have to schedule it around too many things, and people aren't taking holidays because there's nowhere to go. That actually people have been much more open for like quick collaboration. So we've had some really nice new client relationships come off the back of the pandemic and kind of working from home, where we've had to change the majority of our programs to be working virtually versus that kind of face-to-face. We were really worried at the start about whether clients would be up for it and up for doing things on Zoom. And obviously there's, when you're working with young people in particular, there's a whole, or vulnerable people, there's all this safeguarding kind of issues that you have to deal with as well. But no, we've been really pleasantly surprised. And I think it will continue. I think the pandemic has made people think a lot about community, about well-being, about mental health. Obviously, we've also had the George Floyd killing, and then the Black Lives Matters movement. So, and I do sense this kind of movement now around a sense of community and belonging to your local community, and that kind of general giving back. Pre-pandemic, there was a huge kind of movement around climate change, and if you remember pre-pandemic, there was a lot of like Extinction Rebellion doing a lot of work on climate change, and I definitely foresee that being, you know, top and front of the agenda for a number of our stakeholders, you know, clients, our people, our new grads, potential grads, everyone.
Yeah. How about from your perspective, Kim? Has the pandemic changed any conversations for you?
I think it's had two impacts, really. I think so. Number one, immediately everybody started to recognize the importance of work-life balance. And I think that was the first thing that happened both internally and also externally. And as soon as I started up having Zoom calls with lawyers who had only ever met in a suit and tie, and I was suddenly seeing inside their house, it changes completely the conversation that you're going to have. Within Vodafone as well, there was a great recognition that a lot of people were going to have to take some time out of their working day in the middle to make sure that their kids were okay, and they might make some time up later, or that might just have to disappear for a bit, the making up of time later. But then I think on the flip side, we've also seen actually there are certain activities that feel much harder or have become much harder. We're seeing it's harder to run access programs virtually and to be able to make sure that you keep the attention of everybody on Zoom. Because if somebody's not speaking on Zoom, then they drop to the back and you don't even see if they're there. And so you can really easily lose their engagement. But it's definitely changing the way in which we all work. And I think so long as we can keep that work-life balance point in mind, I think we've got a really nice platform to move forward from with diversity and inclusion. But I also think, there's been so many reports in the news and globally around the impact it's having on women's work and women's ability to work, that we've really got to keep having that conversation and say, well, what are we doing to make sure that everybody has equal access to opportunities? So it's a mixed bag.
Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about the increase in transparency that law firm and clients are having now, and kind of, I know during our prep for the session, we kind of mentioned how that could be a burden now because there's more work to do on the law firm side, but also clients also need to hold up their end of the deal. Emma, why don't you start with that one?
Sure. Yeah, it is sometimes a burden, but it's also really helpful. Like, the more clients that ask more questions, the stronger that I can make the business case internally to do something about it. Because change, things require change, and sometimes that change requires more funding or more resource, or a kind of change in operations or processes or reporting, or whatever it is. And the more people that ask, and especially the client, the more clients that ask, and especially that are like strategic clients that ask the questions of us, then the easier it is for me to make that change internally and to get the buy-in and to build the business case. So although I said earlier, I do find it a bit of a burden because everything's in kind of very different formats, whether it's a kind of logging on and going onto an online portal, or whether it's Excel spreadsheets or a whole kind of series of questions on an email, or somebody wants a conversation instead. The richness and the value in it is the fact that they're asking the question in the first place. Because I think without asking the question, we wouldn't have moved so much, but potentially the change wouldn't have been so rapid, or we wouldn't have been aware of what our stakeholders were interested in. So I'm all up for people asking questions because it's really helpful. It gets us to find out about where change is needed. But yeah, as I say, it is sometimes a burden because it comes in so many different formats and deadlines are more different, and yeah, just kind of keeping an eye on all of that, I suppose, is an evolving challenge.
How about from your perspective, Kim?
I know that some of the firms we've worked with have said, if you could just ask the questions not during the same time that we're talking about making people up to partner, that would be really helpful. I know sometimes it can be the timing as much as anything. I think from a client perspective, obviously that transparency and the collection of data then allows us to make data-driven decisions, which are obviously much stronger than making a subjective choice about what we think could work. So from our perspective, it's really important, but I am conscious of the number of times I've been told that the burden of reporting can sometimes take away from doing the work. And I think from the work that I've been doing with the General Counsel for Diversity and Inclusion, one of the drivers there would be, you know, how can we come up with something that's consistent and would that help? Consistent but not solid, because I don't think it will ever be a fixed picture. So I think there's always going to be things that come in and client choices that change. And as you said, Emma, that's helpful. Like it moves us forward.
Absolutely. We have another question from the audience who asks, a number of firms set themselves new diversity targets last month for 2025. How much pressure do clients apply to progress there in particular? Emma, how are you seeing diversity targets and the pressure that clients are now putting on top of that?
I don't think I can really comment much more to say that, you know, clients are increasingly asking us questions on a range of things. I don't think I've particularly noticed more recently a focus on anything that's come out kind of recently in terms of 2025. Clients, as I say, continue to ask questions on a range of issues, CSR and D&I. Kim, I don't know whether, sorry, I don't know whether you're seeing anything else.
From my perspective, we look at, well, our 40% target and our 15% target, we're talking about that the life of the time that we work with a firm. We're not specifically saying, you know, we've got a line in the sand and it has to be achieved by a certain period of time. We're saying we want to work with firms. We internally have targets that we have to meet, you know, that Vodafone has set as an organization. And I guess it's sort of not unlikely that law firms would also be trying to replicate that or would be moving towards that place, but it's not something that our firms have come back to us and said, this is where we will be by this time.
The other kind of area I wanted to touch on, probably our last question, is Emma, you mentioned a lot of the reporting and how maybe it comes off of certain systems, but a lot of it is also recorded on a spreadsheet. What sort of reporting metrics do you collect, and also how do you process that data?
What do we collect? Oh, we collect a whole range of different stuff from a range of different places. So lots of the diversity data would be drawn from HR systems, and we use a number of different systems internally because of the way the firm is kind of made up and the legacy of the history of the firm. We would use lots of our financial data when we're looking at the climate data and all the energy use, and we use our travel data systems when we're looking at the carbon associated with our travel systems. What else are we using? Oh, we use quite often, we'd be using our like client onboarding systems to be looking at our clients, so be looking at our suppliers as well. So the kind of onboarding process that we would do for the clients, we take elements of that and use the same processes to look at suppliers and check and do the due diligence there. Gosh, yeah, so a whole kind of range, and then lots and lots of Excel spreadsheets as well, trying to keep hold of things and information in a variety of different forms. SharePoint's been really useful, so we've got lots of different SharePoint sites and SharePoint hubs. We have a pitching hub and a pitching library, which is super useful because you can have your kind of standard content there and direct people to it internally to kind of help support some of the client questions that might come through. But as I say, we do like to tailor the responses because we do like to make it relevant to what the client is interested in as well, and that we're talking about the same things rather than just keeping it as standard content.
Do you think legal tech suppliers to the sector are changing or are recognizing how important diversity and inclusion has become in the legal sector over the last few years?
I don't think I know too much about legal tech to like comment on that one, I'm afraid. Yeah, I don't know, I'm afraid. I don't know enough about the industry. I mean, I get approached often by tech companies, not necessarily legal tech ones, that are offering software solutions on managing your community investment programs, to managing your supply, responsible supply data, to how you manage your carbon footprint globally. But all of those kind of software companies that are approaching me are much more kind of specialists within that area rather than particularly legal tech. Could I see, to be honest, I don't know enough about the legal tech industry to comment.
Fair.
I know we've been approached by, you mentioned EcoVadis. I know we've also been approached by a few legal tech providers who claim to have diversity and inclusion packages that really assist with this kind of thing from a client perspective. And I can't see why that as an industry wouldn't grow as our client requirements grow.
Yeah, great. I think we'll wrap up with one question. If you have one key takeaway, we've covered quite a lot, and D&I and CSR is quite a huge, very important area in law firms. What's one key takeaway from each of you that listeners could go back and perhaps look up or implement in their firms today? Yeah.
One key takeaway. Get to know your clients. So look at who your clients are, where your market strategy is going, and think about how what we've spoken today can help you grow a different client relationship, live your values, and create greater impact.
Beautiful. Kim?
I think very similar. It's all about collaboration. I mean, Emma, you just mentioned impact, and the more of us that are doing the same thing and asking the same question, the more we're going to change. So, it's all about that.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for speaking. Some really good stuff there. And thank you everyone who joined. Have a lovely day.
Thank you for having us.